Hello, everyone. So I'm back. I know I haven't done a live in a while. I told y'all, don't get used to lives because, yeah. But today I want to pretty much talk about Yahweh a little bit. So I've shared this in bits in previous sessions. In fact, if you're looking for something more in depth, check out a lecture that I did a few months ago called The Empire of El. This is where I give a full account on everything I'm going to share today. So if you feel like you're missing detail, know that there's already a 2-hour lecture dedicated to this topic. For those of you who are here live or you end up watching the replay, leave your questions or comments in the comment section. If appropriate, I'll answer while live. If not, they might turn into a future video or a future session, or I might ignore you. Just depends on what the comment is. But so yes, Yahweh is not the name of the supreme God. Yahweh is the name of the Hebrews, of the God of the Hebrews, or the God of the Israelites. That's a little bit different. Now, I've been sharing a bit more recently about the polytheistic nature of the actual structure of the spirit world, even within the Bible, right? The Bible uses this thing, especially in most of the Old Testament, called henotheism, which means that the acknowledgement of multiple gods is there. It's just that they emphasize the supremacy of one over the rest. And in this case, within the Old Testament, that is Yahweh. Now, that's because the Israelites or the Hebrews themselves are loyal to one God for most of the story. And I say most because there are a few times throughout scripture where they reverence other deities. Not even from a falling away place, but just because some things are more acceptable at some times rather than others. But for the most part, they were loyal just to Yahweh. But even within the Bible, Yahweh isn't actually presented as the supreme God, right? There's a few areas, and I know this is very controversial, and this is something that threatens especially the worship industry. It's like, what do we do with all these songs that we have dedicated to Yahweh, who I thought was Yeshua's father? I'm going to cover that. But bear with me here. I'm going to do my best to give you information and revelation as it deals with this topic. So let's start off with this. Genesis actually begins in polytheism, right? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then it begins to describe the earth, it being void. And then it goes all the way down. And then it says, and then God said, let us make man in our image, right? Nothing to see here, unless you look at it from the lens of the language it was supposedly written in, that being Hebrew, right? In the Hebrew language, or in the original language, the word used there for God is Elohim. Elohim means gods, right? Everything in Hebrew that ends with yod mem or im is plural, right? So a better presentation of that would be, in the beginning, the gods created the heavens and the earth. And then when you get down into the creation of man, it still fits the narrative there, because, and then they said, let us make man in our image. This is a plurality having a discussion about us, right? There's more than one entity present that's operating under the guise or under the title of Elohim. It's plural, right? So this is something that starts off the Bible. So how do we then go from that, multiple gods being acknowledged in the very first verse of the Bible, to only one God being recognized throughout the rest of the Old Testament? That's because you're dealing with a pantheon, right? If you would go to Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8. This actually gives you some level of a lens to kind of see what I'm talking about here, right? Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8. And it says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, he divided mankind. He fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Now, a lot of people will take this and say, oh, the Most High, that must be Yahweh. No, if you even look at it in the original language, that being if you use the interlinear, right, which shows you the language that was used there at that time, the word is actually Elyon, not Yahweh. In fact, once it gets to talking about Yahweh, it mentions him more so as a son of Elyon, not as Elyon himself, which means the name of the supreme God, according to the Bible, is El or Elyon. What other references to El do we have other than the fact that a lot of the names of the gods, the names of Elohim, Elohim still denotes El. It's the family of El. El and his kids, El and his family. Let's talk about this. What other things denote the name El? If Yahweh was actually meant to be the supreme God of all reality, how come nothing in heaven is named after him? How come there are no angels named after Yahweh? Right? You have Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Zadkiel, Zafkiel, Paniel. No Micaiah, Gabriel, no Raphael, no, none of them, right? No angels are named after who's supposedly the supreme God. Not even that. Going back to something I referenced a little bit earlier, many people, especially those who get deep into the Hebraic or don't really do their due diligence when it comes to research, assume that the Father that Yeshua is trying to reunite humanity with is Yahweh. And that's not the case. Yeshua said something very specific. He said, my Father that is in heaven. Well, when you read the Old Testament, Yahweh wasn't in heaven. Yahweh was in the tabernacle traveling with them. He was in the temples. He was in the tabernacles, in the innermost, but he was with them on earth, not in heaven. Not just that, but you actually see them clash. This is why the operations of Yeshua is different from the operations of Yahweh. If Yeshua was simply Yahweh in a body, as they propose when they say, me and my Father are one, when you see me, you see him, Yeshua would have came about and did the same things that Yahweh did in the Old Testament. In fact, if he was simply Yahweh in a body, there would have been no need for him to present a New Testament, because the Old Testament, he obviously says he didn't come to abolish. Not only that he didn't come to, but that he actually couldn't, because it's of a different spirit. This isn't the first time that there's a reference to Yahweh being of a different spirit than him. One of my favorite examples takes place later on in the New Testament, where Yeshua is being heckled and his disciples don't like that. So they come to him, they say, hey, you want us to call down some fire and handle that? He says, no, 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 you sons of thunder, you don't know what spirit you're of. He rebukes them for trying to do that. Now, where do we hear about fire being called down to smite your enemies? Oh, that's the Old Testament. Elijah did that on behalf of Yahweh when battling the prophets of Baal and Asherah. If Yeshua was Yahweh in a body, I had no problem with that, because that's the way Yahweh operated. Disrespect me, I torch you. That's his operations. But Yeshua not only rebuked them, but was blatantly disgusted at the idea of scorching people just for heckling you. I also tell you this, and I shared this when I had my ministry anniversary a few months ago, back in June. One God can't have two testaments. The fact that there are two testaments in the Bible tells you that there are two gods in operation. Now, this is only controversial if you're trying to force monotheism to be the framework of everything, instead of looking at the framework that the Bible actually presents. The Bible presents a polytheistic nature, and if you pay attention to the Old Testament, it's very much polytheistic in its structure, meaning that you're not looking at one God that actually exists and the rest being fake. No, you're looking at one God, or you're looking at several gods that exist and one God fighting for supremacy amongst the other gods. That's actually the Old Testament. In fact, not only do you have them fighting, there's even a part in the Bible where Yahweh actually loses a fight. And that's in 2 Kings, I believe that's chapter 3. His people are battling the Moabites, and the name of their God is Chemosh, and the Israelites are winning. They're at war. They're killing them. And out of desperation, the king of the Moabites does a sacrifice to his god Chemosh. Chemosh manifests and scares off the Israelites, and they win the battle. It was such a defeat that it caused Elisha to have missed the prophecy. Something that he spoke that would have come to pass didn't, and that was altered purely because of the invocation of the Moabites to their god. Now, if it was simply a statue that did nothing, or if it was just a ritual with no fruit, they wouldn't have been ran off. But upon doing research on Chemosh, Chemosh was specifically a war deity, which means they only ever invoked him to help them win wars, and it worked. So, if we are going to count Yahweh's victory over Baal via Elijah as a victory of Yahweh over Baal, we have to simultaneously factor in Yahweh's loss to Chemosh in that same way. You have to tally the scores right. Now, this is something, if you read the whole Bible through, most people don't, you see things like that, right? You're seeing them battle for supremacy, battle for influence. There's even a moment, I believe it's the early part of 2 Kings, when you're dealing with Elijah, and he's intercepting the generals as they're trying to leave the region to go and consult a different god. And the critique wasn't that the punishment wasn't because they were going to try to invoke a god that did not exist, but because Yahweh was jealous that they were trying to invoke a god that was not him. So for this reason, they give him the title Elkanah. And there goes the word El again. It's the fact that Elion is the supreme god of the pantheon, that there's so many references to him in their titles. That's why you have Elkanah, El Roi, El Shaddai, El Elyon, all of these being references to the actual supreme God. Yahweh is just one of his sons. In fact, Yahweh, even dealing with the nature of Yahweh. See, this isn't something I created. This is something that existed in the ancient world. And if you do your research, you can find it. Yahweh was a part of the Canaanites before he became a part of the Hebrews. In fact, the name Yahweh there doesn't just mean the breath or the wind, but it means the horror, the desolation. Yahweh in their pantheon was a war deity. What do I mean by pantheon? Well, in the Bible, there's actually multiple gods referenced around that same period, around that same time, and they all already exist as a part of a pantheon. If we were doing Bible study and we're reading the Bible and we see Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Artemis, and Athena, you're like, oh, these are the Greeks. Well, no different when dealing with the Old Testament. You read the names of the gods that they're dealing with, and you're like, oh, these are the Canaanites. These are the Ugaritic people. These are the Semitic people, the Sumerian people. Okay, I got you. Yahweh is one among many, a powerful one among many, but one among many nonetheless. The actual name of the Father that Yeshua is trying to connect us with is named El, which means that if you actually take Yeshua up on his offer and you walk through the pathways of sonship, in order to walk in your inheritance, that's not something you get from Yahweh, that's something you get from El. So why does it matter? Oh, if you invoke the wrong God, you get the wrong inheritance. You don't actually get the thing Yeshua was offering. You get something else entirely. You get a distraction, right? So think about the pattern. You be born again of the Spirit. When you see me, you see the Father, the Son seated at the right hand of the Father, forever making intercession. If you invoke Yahweh because you think that's the Father he's talking about, you invoke the wrong God and you get a different result. You don't get the intended result. And that's actually what we've seen throughout history, is people invoking the wrong God, trying to access the promises of another. So let's talk a little bit about El. El is the emperor of the heavens. It's his name in which the archangels have their name, where Elohim gets its name, where Yeshua, right? It mentioned that when he came down to earth, when he received his prophecy, said that he will be called Emmanuel, meaning God is with us. Notice his name again was not Emmanuel, meaning Yahweh is with us, but Emmanuel, meaning El is with us. someone coming to establish the government of El. Well, how was El's government structured? Oh, you get this in the book of Job, the other book people really don't like. In the book of Job, it references something that is a Mesopotamian concept. It's Canaanite, it's Ugaritic, but if I'm being simple, it's Mesopotamian in origin, called the Divine Council. And the way that it operates is that El rules, El and his children operate in a council where they sit together and discuss what's going to happen in reality, right? And in the book of Job, you actually have Job going up to sit in on these meetings. In fact, the book of Job is one of them that even mentions this. It says that the Most High calls for all his sons and Satan shows up with them. Still consider Satan one of the sons of God, right? So there's something interesting here. Now, the thing about it is Job is not a Hebrew book. Job is a Canaanite book. Based on the structure of the book, from my own research, Job is more Canaanite than anything. Could be another Mesopotamian region, possibly Ugaritic, but if we're doing the structure right, Job is a Canaanite book. And within that Canaanite structure, you have that divine council. Now, where else do we get a divine council other than Yeshua, right? Yeshua, when he comes down and he says, hey, who do men say that I am? And they say, oh, some say you're this, some say you're that, some say you're this, some say you that. He says, great. He says to his disciples, who do you say that I am? And they say, oh, you are the Son of the living God. He says, oh, no one but my Father in heaven could have revealed that to you. And then he says, upon this rock, I will establish my ecclesia. He speaks Hebrew, so he said kahal. But the meaning actually stays the same. What is the ecclesia? What is the kahal? It's a divine council, the assembly of ambassadors or the assembly of gods. What Yeshua did was one of the first apostolic acts of his ministry, which is taking something heavenly and giving it an earthly manifestation. This is why he follows up by saying, whatever is bound on earth is bound in heaven. Whatever is loosed on earth is loosed in heaven. He's taking something of a heavenly concept and presenting it in the earth for operation, bridging the gap between the two. That's apostolic. That's not a Hebrew concept. That's a Canaanite concept. Why would he reintroduce that? Well, Yeshua's message goes in one ear and out the other. He goes to people and tells them, don't you know that ye are gods? Well, the word he uses there is Elohim. Oh, don't you know that you are sons of El and you have a position to rule and reign from within the heavens? That's more so what he's talking about here. So in reminding us of who we are, he puts us back into a position of dominion by which we can operate again. Oh, maybe this is why creation is groaning for the awakening of the sons. It's so many empty thrones, and creation is at the mercy of the gods that show up. Even though we exist within that pantheon and we exist within that family. You consider yourself born again. You consider yourself a child of God, a son of God. Guess what? That's a son of El. That's a child of El. You belong on the council. That is what the ecclesia is all about. It's not about 501c3 setting up on every block. You know, I'm from the Bible Belt, so we run across more churches than anything. That's not what it's all about. It's about legislation. It's about jurisdiction. It's about dominion and living from identity. That's actually what we have here. So no, Yeshua is not the son of Yahweh. The confusion comes, and I mentioned this a little bit, but didn't give too much detail. The confusion comes in from people that study the Hebraic, because Yahweh is the God of the Hebrews, and oftentimes the God of a region was presented as the parent of a region. So if it was a male deity, that's the father of those people. If it's a female deity, that's the goddess, that's the mother of that region, right? The Israelites or the Hebrews were no different. They were seen as the children of Yahweh because Yahweh was their God. That had nothing to do with Yeshua. Yeshua simply was Hebrew. When he walked the earth for a period of time, he was Hebrew. And that's really the only connection. In the same way, when talking about lineage, it also calls him a son of David. No, it's not saying that Yeshua at that point was hundreds to thousands of years old and was actually like the brother of Solomon. No, it's just referencing lineage in the way that they spoke in East Africa. So there's no difference here nor there between how they operated. So, no, Yeshua never really acknowledged Yahweh as his father. In fact, everything that he did really spit in the face of Yahweh's operations. This is why he can walk around and say, hey, I know it says this, but we're going to do this instead. Hey, I know this is the way y'all used to doing it. Hey, I know what's said, I know what's written, but we're going to do it this way instead. Is because he's not acting on behalf of the God that implemented those things. He's acting under the structure of a different spirit, of actually a higher spirit. So yes, Yahweh and Yeshua are not father and son. They're actually brothers, both of them being children of El, sons of El. High-ranking family members, but family members and brothers nonetheless. So that even changes your relationship, not just with Yeshua, but with Yahweh, that's not your God. At least he shouldn't be. That's not your father, not at all. No, that's your brother. See, he's got middle child syndrome, but he's brother nonetheless, just because you, born again, are a child of El. I know this is some tough stuff to hear because we have doctrines, we have teachings, we have books, we have worship music, all dedicated to Yahweh, and we've missed the narrative altogether that Yahweh is not that man's dad, nor is that the guy that Yeshua is trying to bridge the gap between us to reconnect with. No, not at all. All right. So that is that's the bulk of what I wanted to talk about today. So just as a heads up, I do have a few courses and classes coming up. I have a healer's course that's coming up, 8 weeks. I have a spiritual warfare and deliverance course coming up, that's 7 weeks. We just finished the 13-week mentorship course. That'll be coming back around in the spring. So for those of you interested in that, be on the lookout. Come spring, information will be coming out soon. If you're not already, subscribe to the Patreon, patreon.com/Cave of Mystery. Join the Discord server. All my information can be found on my website, caveofmystery.org. .com is not me. So yes, just to summarize, right? You're not a son of Yahweh. You're a son of El. Your inheritance is in El, not in Yahweh. Until you start working with El, you've never met the Father. You've taken Yeshua up on his offer only to the extent of accessing the wrong person. It's time to take him up all the way on his actual offer, which is to get to know his Father, build a relationship with his Father. And his Father's name is El. This is why the heavens are named after El. This is why the angels are named after El. This is why Yeshua was named after El. This is why Elohim has its name. This is why so many titles in the Old Testament reference El. It's because he's actually the one in charge. That's our Heavenly Father. So my commission for you all today is to begin to build a relationship with your actual Heavenly Father. Get to know the Father that Yeshua was introducing you to. I love y'all. Until next time, y'all be blessed. Later.